This is the Advances in Medical Radiological Protection session. My name is Kimberly Applegate. I'm the chair of Committee 3 on Medicine in the ICRP, and I'm a pediatric radiologist by background, and I want to have my co-moderator introduce herself.
Bonjour and good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Légaré. I'm the Director and Corporate Radiation and Laser Safety Officer at the Ottawa Hospital in Canada, and also a past president at CRPA. Welcome, everyone.
Yes, we hope for some very interesting discussion. We have 5 presenters. 2 are going to be video presentations and 3 live. We have several that are from the ICRP of current work, and we're going to start with a presentation by Mika Kortsanimi on a task group from the Committee 3 108. It's part 1, and it's looking at optimization of machine-produced digital imaging. And Mika is from Helsinki, Finland, and he will talk about this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly, for a very kind introduction, and I thank also the organizers for having me here. And good morning, everyone. So, I'm from the Committee 3. I'm a medical physicist, and I will present the Task Group 108 and next steps in optimization in medical imaging. So what we did in Task Group 108 is that we aim to get comprehensive and practical guidance on optimization in digital radiology. And our work includes a document which is divided in 2 parts. We have the first part, which is more or less the general characteristics of optimization, which is independent of the specific imaging modality we use. And that part has been already out for public consultation recently, and now we are just digesting and analyzing the results. The second part is a bit more technically oriented. It's the practical aspects of optimization in digital radiography, so the traditional X-ray imaging, fluoroscopy, which is more or less the dynamic X-ray imaging, related interventions and so on, and then computed tomography. So what we do in part 2 is we cover all the main imaging techniques in radiology. And that will be given for public consultation early next year, or we hope to do that. And additionally, we give some educational materials to facilitate improvements in optimization in ICRpedia and learning slide set and so forth. So what we aim for, and why we wrote the document, is to emphasize the possibilities that we have in a very fast developing area of radiological imaging technology. For example, the new photon counting CT systems are a good example of that. Also, we address the importance of multi-professionality in optimization to really make it work in a clinical practice. An overall motivation of a document we are writing is based on the significance of radiology techniques in healthcare overall, and that significance is increasing. Also, we address the cumulative radiation exposure to patients worldwide by radiological imaging. And it's good to mention that there we actually do give quite a high exposures to patients with various examinations as a planned exposure, but we don't have a big risk of catastrophic exposures as we have in nuclear industry. And also another point is that from that cumulative exposure, computed tomography, which is popularity in 3D imaging, gives a dominant part worldwide from this exposure. So while deriving the document and the task group work, we acknowledge the wide differences in the levels of optimization in different countries and in different organizations. For example, depending on their availability of equipment and different facilities, financial and human resourcing, and so on. And to tackle that, the report defines rough categories in professional issues, methodology, and processes to achieve different levels of optimization. So we try to give concrete guidelines how to move forward step by step. So there's a preliminary stage which is more or less the ground zero for setting up facility, and then we move from basic to intermediate and finally to advanced level, hopefully. And we recommend that the imaging facilities use our documents to assess where they are in their current optimization practices, and also to guide their decisions further for continual improvement. So it should be always underlying improvement that is going on. Here you can see the components and levels required for this continually improving optimization. So we have components of professional issues where we try to evolve from traditionally quite rigid professional roles and hierarchies to more multi-professional level, and finally to multi-professional teams, because we need combined knowledge and expertise in order to make optimization work and to improve that. Then we have methodology from quite traditional technical radiation dose and image quality performance testing towards clinically relevant parameters and metrics. So something that will guide further towards the improved care outcome of the patient, also taking into account the radiological protection. And in processes from isolated activities towards more comprehensive process of system-wide online monitoring, for example. So, as we know, you cannot jump to the top of the mountain with one leap. So we try to guide appropriate steps which are reasonable for different countries and organizations to utilize. Patient dose audits are a good example of very basic activity in optimization, and it's because the knowledge of patient doses is typically the first step that you can imagine in optimization. And paired with that, it's good to have reference values, diagnostic reference levels to guide and to see where we stand with the patient exposures. Further, multi-professional teams help to give feedback from those results so that we can actually implement corrective actions of optimization. And because the optimization is always a balance, we should have clinical image quality evaluation in medical imaging paired with the dose audits of the patients. So we have more effective optimization process in place. So across the documents, we like to emphasize the importance of multi-professional teams and collaboration as a key component in successful optimization. And there we need the expertise of radiologists for tasks specific clinical image quality and knowledge how to evaluate that. From radiographers, the exam workflow issues, patient safety issues are in place. For medical physicists like I am, we need to bring our expertise and knowledge of underlying physics, imaging parameters, quality assurance, and dosimetry into this equation. And when we put this together, because we need to, we also need good communication between these professions, issue which has been discussed a lot during the past days. So we can envision an optimization as a model of combined risk from radiation and clinical issues, more specifically from image quality evaluations. Our traditional approach to optimization has utilized more or focused more to those aspects. But when we think about our aims to reduce radiation dose, we should approach that with caution, because the clinical risk for image quality will be high if images are non-diagnostic, obviously. So that is already clear from Poisson statistics and how the noise appears in the images with low dose. So our aim is to reach the global minimum on this net risk curve. And we have more and more elaborate methods to utilize those methods for more effective optimization. What we see when we reach more advanced optimization is the gradual unification of core radiation protection components. Specifically, quality assurance is more stitched to optimization with patient-specific parameters which are clinically relevant, together with wide-scale on-data monitoring. And optimization is more stitched to justification when we have automated referral guidelines integrated in the hospital systems, together with harmonized imaging parameters and protocoling rules. So as a result, we have an optimization process which is more effective and integrated into the clinical practice instead of being an isolated effort. So that is what we aim for. And I acknowledge the contribution from the members of the task group, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mika. We've been working on this for a good 5.5 years, I think. So we hope to have a workshop, a digital workshop on part 2 sometime in early 2023. So hope you all can listen in or contribute your comments to it. The next presentation is a digital or a virtual one, and this is by Lydia Wilson from the United States, and she will be talking about the role of artificial intelligence or machine learning in radiation therapy treatment planning systems.
Hi, I'd like to thank the meeting organizers for the invitation to share our recent work to improve radiation protection for children receiving radiotherapy. Advancements in cancer care in recent decades have enabled survival rates to steadily increase, such that currently around 85% of all children who are diagnosed with cancer are able to survive 5 years or more. However, epidemiological studies have revealed that the long-term survivors of cancer are at a high risk for wide-ranging chronic health conditions, many of which are associated with their radiotherapy exposures. And so there's an urgent and vital need to not only continue this trend in improving survival, but also minimize the side effects of the radiation treatments themselves. Studies aiming to achieve this require a deep understanding of the relation between a physical radiation exposure and its biologic effects. And unfortunately, this relation is often uncertain or unknown. Conventional methods of investigating this link typically rely on dose-volume analyses, which summarize only the parts of the dose distribution that are perceived as relevant, and then it's that summary that we correlate with the effect of interest. The problem is that this is inherently a leaky pipeline, where we first lose that dosimetric information in organs and tissues that don't have a theoretical importance, and then we lose that detailed spatial information regarding how the dose was distributed within an organ or tissue. Voxel-based analysis methods like image-based data mining, or IBDM, have gained popularity in recent years for the potential to overcome the limitations of conventional dose-volume analyses and improve our understanding of this link between physical exposures and biologic effects. IBDM has 2 primary steps, where we first map the individual patient anatomy and the associated exposure information to a reference anatomy, And second, perform voxel-wise statistical tests to identify associations between dose and effect, and then also highlight where within the anatomy that association is strongest, which can indicate functional subunits that may be implicated in the exposure to effect pathway. Now, although these methods have shown great potential with diagnoses and side effects that are common in adult populations, they hadn't yet been applied to data from children, which tend to encompass wider anatomic variability and also unique diagnoses and side effects from adult populations. And so the purpose of our recent work has been to, for the first time, apply IBDM to data collected from children. And specifically, we are interested in cognitive decline following curative craniospinal irradiation for medulloblastoma. So we achieved our goal using data from 129 children who previously received photon therapy at St. Jude. We picked this population because they provided a challenging test case for our methods with their wide age range and sex distribution. Another important benefit of this cohort is that we had already previously assessed the associations between their dose distributions and cognitive effects using conventional dose volume analyses, so we had a point of comparison with which to contextualize the new IBDM results. So for each patient, we collected their treatment planning, imaging, and their planned dose distribution, and then the outcomes from the previous study, which were scores from longitudinal cognitive assessments of memory and processing speed. And these are two cognitive functions known to be associated with radiation therapy, and they were tested in the St. Jude Department of Psychology. We selected our reference anatomy from among the data in the cohort by finding the patient with a median brain volume. We used NIFTY-REG deformable image registration to perform the spatial normalization, and the voxel-wise statistical test comprised a permutation test of per voxel students' t-tests over 1,000 permutations of the effect labels. Moving on to our results, here you can see average images. So we just averaged the voxel intensity across all patients before and after the spatial normalization, and then the sharpness of the average image indicates how well the anatomy is co-registered. So here, you'll notice a vast improvement in the sharpness from the before to the after images, indicating an overall high accuracy of the spatial normalization. Quantitatively, we achieved an overall registration accuracy of right around 3 millimeters based on contour center of mass assessments. For the dose comparisons, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go through a few representative results. So here you can see a result from our prior analysis, and it's showing a population dose volume histogram, or DVH, for a substructure of the corpus callosum, with patients grouped by their processing speed outcome. So the blue band represents the span of DVHs for children who showed no worsening in processing speed, and then the red band represents children with clinically significant deterioration. Here we can see that the population DVH for children who experienced deteriorating processing speed is shifted to the right of that for children who did not, suggesting that higher dose magnitudes were associated with declining performance. So now, if we look at the results from IBDM, we see a family-wise result indicating an overall moderate association between radiation dose and processing speed, where again, higher dose magnitudes were generally associated with declining performance. If we look at the voxel-wise results, here these blue and green contour lines show volumes where that association was strongest at various significance levels. And we can see that same substructure from the dose volume analysis was entirely within the IBDM identified significant volume, indicating consistency between these two results. In another case, here we have the prior study's results for working memory associations with dose to the left hippocampus. This time, we see a lot of overlap between those population DVHs for the two groups, suggesting no association between radiation dose and working memory declines. However, if we look at the results from IBDM, we see a strong association between radiation dose and working memory, where again, higher dose magnitudes were generally associated with declining performance. If we look at the voxel-wise results, we don't see any areas of high significance overlapping with the hippocampi, so that is consistent with the prior analysis. However, a highly significant volume popped up in the brainstem, and this really highlights a limitation of conventional dose volume techniques in that you need to select the structures that you'll consider in advance, and we simply didn't consider the brainstem at all in our previous study. In summary, our recent work represents the first application of voxel-based analysis methods to data collected from children, and our results reveal that it is feasible to spatially normalize pediatric radiotherapy data despite wide age-related anatomic variability. And IBDM dose comparison results were remarkably consistent with those of conventional dose volume techniques, with the added strength of interpreting the full 3D dose distribution without a priori structure selection. So now that we have a validated pipeline for improving our understanding of the late effects associated with contemporary conformal radiotherapy, our ability to apply it to larger cohorts will require several new developments. First, we'll need auto-segmentation algorithms developed for and validated in children in order to obtain comprehensive and consistent delineations in these cohorts. Deep learning algorithms are likely to be the most robust to anatomic variability characteristic of childhood and the structural aberrations that are associated with childhood malignancies. Second, we'll need fast and easy ways to calculate the dose that was delivered to the patient, rather than just the dose that was planned for the patient. Again, deep learning models that can take into account patient and treatment characteristics are likely to be the best path forward here. And finally, once we have the delivered dose and refined understanding of its spatial associations with biologic effects, the next step will be to develop models for projecting risk. And yet again, deep learning models that can incorporate multi-channel inputs, considering clinical and patient factors in addition to dose and maybe even other characteristics of the physical exposure, will likely produce the most comprehensive assessments of risk yet. So in conclusion, our work has shown that it is feasible to apply voxel-based analysis methods to data collected from children and improve our understanding of the link between physical radiation exposures and their biologic effects. With future work, this understanding can help guide treatment planning and survivorship care to avoid toxicity and improve long-term quality of life for childhood cancer survivors. I'd like to acknowledge the various collaborators who contributed to this work and the funding sources that made it all possible. And thank you so much for your time and attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm sorry that I can't be there in Vancouver to discuss this with you in person, but here are 2 great ways to get in touch with me otherwise.
So we're almost back on track with our schedule, which is great. More time for discussion later. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Ali Shushtarian. We will be talking today about radiation safety program for hybrid modalities in Canada. And Ali is the most latest past president of CRPA and senior radiation safety specialist at the Ottawa Hospital. Welcome, Ali.
Oops. It's not my slides.
So can we ask the, yes, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
I was like, what? I was wondering, what, did I forget something? Okay. No, it's been, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to be talking about the radiation safety program for hybrid modalities in Canada. So basically, a couple of key considerations that if you're ever planning to have those dual modalities, we're going to go through those. So let me see if I could figure this out. There we go. Just quickly, the Ottawa Hospital. The Ottawa Hospital is one of Canada's largest learning and research hospital. It has approximately more than 12,000 staff members. It's a multi-campus. It's affiliated with the University of Ottawa, and they delivered specialized care to Eastern Ontario region. But the techniques and research discovered are adopted around the world. So quick background, MRI scans use a strong magnetic field to produce detailed image of instructions of your body. Taking into account the PET scans use a tracer to highlight abnormality that indicates disease. Now, the strength of these two modalities produces some of the most highly detailed pictures inside of our body currently available. The next couple of slides, we're going to look at a couple of key considerations. The MRI facility requirement, room design. We're going to look at some MRI-compatible radiation safety equipments, workflow and safety, and users primarily with PET must adapt to operate safely and effectively in an MRI environment. So this is one of the pictures that we have here, the room design. So the main component of MRI is the radio frequency shield. And it keeps all the RF noises out of the room. I don't know if you have actually ever been into one of those rooms or cages, but it's fantastic. It looks great. I want to actually paint my room like that color. The lead concrete radiation shield is built outside the RF cage. The leaded glass window, as you can see on the picture below, it's a double panel. So one thing to consider is the doors must be well shielded for RF shield integrity. And the lead lining doors sometimes tend to lag over time, impacting the door shield, sealed. Also, we have to think ahead, hopefully not in many years, eventually of scanner replacement. So we also have to look into consideration of dose pass-throughs. So it needs to meet the RF shielding requirements. So that's just in MRI. This would be called a waveguide. So we have to also consider possibility of accidental pass through of metal items into scanner room. Also, water can damage the integrity of RF shield. Want to also look and consider location of safety showers and eye washes. Also, requirement of washrooms. So if you're doing PET and MRI at the same time, so you want to make sure either you have a designated washroom or two different set of washrooms, depending on the space you have. So the TLD and EPDs must be MRI safe. All your PPEs must be also MRI safe. We want to make sure that we want to do indirect monitoring and you keep your dose meters outside. And the seal source for the QC source, the shielding itself, the shielded container has to be non-ferrous. Or you could store the source outside, in some cases, and scan outside the scan room and inquire the dose to be transported inside. So some of the key considerations on workflow and radiation safety. Again, if you're operating both as MRI only or nuclear medicine, so you want to make sure when you're planning your patients that you have, one day will be, if you can, one day could be just MRI or one day could be PET. But if you can't do that, and if you have a half a day of PET or vice versa, you want to make sure you do your wipe testing between when you're switching between the two. And keep in mind, after the first PET MRI participant, the washroom, if you have only one, has to be designated as nuclear medicine washroom. So we're turning to training. So the technologists, they have dual certificate, nuclear medicine and MRI technologists. So MRI only personnel receives radiation safety training to operate safely when PET research is done, before and after their equipment. That's what we have implemented in our facility. Understanding the radiation risk, knowledge, and signage. So when we have the MR only, we sort of flip the radiation safety warning sign. And when we have the PET, we sort of have it. So we decommission between each use. So we're going to turn quickly on now PET CTs. PET CT scan, again, as a background, shows the area increase of metabolic activity, while the CT scan shows detail of atomic location. So this will tell you exactly where the location is. That's a good tool to use. A couple of key considerations of if you want to have a PET CT installed. I think one of the most important things is doing a cost analysis to making sure that the PET CT center is financially viable. Sorry. Regulatory and licensing requirement. So you want to make sure since this involves CTE, you have to make sure the federal and provincial regulatory you do your licensing requirement, your permits and approval, and any delivery of the permits to keep that in consideration. So to meet your rigorous requirement, as low as reasonably achievable, you want to take into consideration the principle of radiation dose must be implemented through the management and control work practices, personal training and qualification, control of occupational and public exposure, and planning for emergency situations as well. In conclusion, our experience has shown careful planning and close collaboration with radiation safety officer, stakeholders, experienced staff. That's a key one, to have experienced staff in hand, and having an effective radiation safety program in place is necessary when moving from the PET only to either PET MRI or PET CT environment. I would like to thank our partners of Brain Imaging Center team as the Royal Hospital and the University of Ottawa Heart Institute, and also our radiation safety department at the Ottawa Hospital as well too. So I'll leave you with this new little cartoon that this is our next thing that we're implementing. You get a stand and tan at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll keep questions at the end. We'll move on to the next speaker.
Okay. The next is actually a recorded video from ICRP Task Group 116 on radiological protection aspects of imaging involved with radiotherapy. So this is by Colin Martin.
Good morning. There have been dramatic improvements in the delivery of radiotherapy treatment during the last few decades, and this has required more extensive use of imaging. So we set up a task group to look into radiological protection aspects of this. So I'll talk about the types of therapy treatments, conforming the radiation field to the tumor target, image-guided radiotherapy. I'll talk about a survey of imaging practices we carried out. I'll look at optimization and dosimetry. So in brachytherapy, the treatment is performed by placing sources inside the body close to the tumor. So catheters are implanted through which high dose rate sources can be inserted so that they are within or adjacent to tumor tissue. And sealed sources can then be introduced through catheters and retracted automatically before staff enter the treatment room. But accurate positioning of sources is crucial and requires careful planning based on imaging. But the bulk of our report will be about external radiation beam therapy. Tumors are treated with high-energy X-ray beams generated in linear accelerators or gamma-ray beams from high-activity sources. Beams are delivered from multiple directions as gantries move around the patient to build up a high dose at the position of the tumor. So LINACs have high-density multi-leaf collimators that can change the shape of the radiation beam. So the beam shape is adjusted during treatment under computerized control. And movement of the collimator blades can also modulate the intensity of the beams delivered from different directions as the gantry moves. So the new techniques allow the radiation field to be conformed more effectively to the tumor target. The improvements in shaping the radiation field to the tumor can only be realized if the treatment delivery to the patient is performed with millimeter accuracy. So ensuring that the patient is in the correct position so that the precise dose distributions will be delivered to the correct tissues is essential. So this is where imaging comes in. Images of the patient are recorded immediately before treatment delivery to delineate targets and normal tissue for the purpose of adjusting for positional accuracy. So this is called image-guided radiation therapy, or IGRT. So a high-dose margin is left around the tumor to ensure that the treatment is effective. And IGRT allows better targeting of the tumor, reducing the size of the high-dose margin. And it allows reduction of doses to normal tissues and may allow the dose delivered to the tumor target to be increased. Now, we didn't know what the use of imaging in radiotherapy was around the world, so we set up a survey using the ICRP mentees, and I'll give you a few presentations on the results from this. Now, we've got a wide range of different countries, so different stages of development. So we've looked at this in terms of the Human Development Index, or HDI, which combines measures of life expectancy, education, and per capita income. So the proportions of treatments for which image guidance is used in radiocentimeters in each country is shown here. So the blue section looks at those that use it for 75 to 100% of treatments. So the use of image guidance is more frequent in countries with high HDIs, but IGRT is starting to be used in the major radiotherapy centers in all countries. For planning, CT scanning is used in all centers, but other imaging modalities such as MRI, PET-CT, SPECT, and ultrasound may also be used. But during treatment, KV cone beam CT is the modality most widely used for imaging. So this is where you've got an X-ray tube and an imaging plate attached to the linear accelerator, and this can be rotated to produce a CT scan. There's also other non-ionizing sources. One in particular, which is widely used, is optical surface guidance, where an image of the surface of the patient can be produced through optical radiations. So we did a survey of the frequency of imaging of different treatments, and I've colored the bars in terms of the HDI, with the high HDI having a darker color on a thermal scale, and the lower HDI a lighter one. So most centers image at every fraction in countries with a higher HDI, but the numbers do decline as we go to countries with lower HDI, so they may only image once per week or even once per course of treatment. So the reasons for these differences are the availability of imaging equipment on Linux and more patients treated per Linac. Now, dose margins around the tumor targets are used to account for uncertainty in delineation, anatomical changes and movement, so more frequent imaging allows the margins to be reduced to protect normal tissue. So if we were only imaging once per treatment, we have to leave quite a large margin between the field and the tumor edge. But if we're doing it at every fraction, this can be substantially reduced. But the cumulative doses from imaging will contribute to the risk of secondary cancer. So there's a balance between reducing the high dose margin around the target and lowering the dose from imaging to surrounding normal tissues. So Other choices in optimization, apart from frequency, are the volume of tissue to be imaged and the level of image quality required. And our survey showed that 90% of radiotherapy centers use vendor imaging protocols for cone beam CT in 2/3 of the countries. And other surveys have shown that vendor protocols are often not optimized for radiological protection. And fewer than 50% of the radiotherapy centers make adjustments for protocols to individual patients. So optimization requires a knowledge of patient doses from imaging. Well, the survey showed that 50% of the radiotherapy centers in European countries recorded doses, but this was less than 10% in other parts of the world. Many cone beam CT units do not display a dose quantity, and the current techniques for measuring doses are complex and require specialist equipment. Therefore, we decided to carry out another project through the ICRP mentee program because of a few centers measuring the doses and a few centers have the measures that could, or have the methods that could be used to measure it. So we set up a project to determine the feasibility in a wide range of countries using standard phantoms and standard measuring instruments, although the availability of these in several of the countries is fairly limited. So we set up spreadsheets for data collection and now sent these out. So all this is going to feed into our report on radiological protection aspects of imaging. So we'll be talking about planning, optimization, imaging during the treatment cycle, pediatric radiotherapy, evaluation of doses, and also education and training of staff. So I acknowledge the contributions from the members of the task group, the mentees who took part in this survey of radiotherapy practices in their countries, and the additional mentees who have joined the project in 2022 for the dosimetry project. So thank you for your attention.
And it's my pleasure to introduce Anja Almen, and will present on exposure of volunteers in medical research, justified and optimized, ? Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much for this opportunity to give this talk about this very interesting and complex issue. Yes. We can ask us the question, how are volunteers included in the ICRP system for radiological protection? It is included in medical exposure, but it is also very much different from the medical indicated medical exposures. We have ethical aspects, certainly we have to take care of that. And we have to acknowledge that research includes uncertainty in both execution of the project and the outcome of the projects. And we have specific recommendations from ICRP publication 62 to help us to get a good radiation protection. This presentation, I will focus on challenges and use examples from our own investigation performed in Sweden. It was an investigation of 100 research projects that was sent for approval at the Ethics Committee. And some overarching challenges in this field. We have risk assessment that have to be included in ethical approval together with other risks, and radiation risks have to be communicated to the volunteers. We have those constraints to be applied and to be associated with the level of suicidal benefit of the research, and that is a challenge. We have justification of the exposure. This comprises both of the benefit of the research itself and the justification of the modalities used in the research. And of course, we have optimization and of radiological protection, both the medical exposure and not to forget staff. We have different types of research. This is 2 examples. The first one is healthy volunteers that ingested a small amount of polonium and then harvesting the hair to see biogenetics. And the effective dose in this research was less than 20 microsievert in total. And at the other end of the dose spectrum, we have experimental radiotherapy. In this case, flash therapy with a patient with known disease, of course, then, and a target dose of 50 gray in 90 milliseconds. So we have a variety of research projects. In our study, the applications of research projects, we tried to categorize the type of research. And a large extent was research about treatment outcome, both from novel treatment and established ones, about 35–40%. We have a large bunch of clinical trials, pharmaceuticals. And we have research about the radiological methods itself, the diagnostic and radiotherapy, to a small extent. And then we have this kind of group miscellaneous. This was a variety of projects. It's quite challenging. And another challenge was that the radiation project, it was somewhat unclear sometimes if the treatment method should be considered novel or not, and that is important. And what type of modalities was used in the research? To a great extent, computer tomography was used. 45% of the research included exposure with CT. But all other types of modalities was used, like conventional X-ray, etc., nuclear medicine, etc. And the project included also repeat exposures of the volunteers, so we can expect that. Some other challenges I want to address concerning when we assess exposure level and risk and included in the risk assessment. We have specific challenges, and I would point out tissue effects. Then we have to know the absorbed dose, organ absorbed dose, and that is not easy to assess always. And we have this potential exposure that have to be included in the risk assessment. And of course, we have to assess the stochastic effects, and today we rely on effective dose as an indication of risk, but perhaps we could also include lifetime attributable risk, for example, and then should we have incidence or mortality as endpoints? That's a question. In our 100 applications, we saw that about 1/3 of the projects included effective dose above 10 millisieverts, and a tiny part of them included above 100 millisievert. And some cases, the stated effective dose was wrong in the applications, and organ dose was seldom assessed. So in publication 62, we have to use, it's advised to use those constraints. We have categories regarding suicidal benefit, 4 of them. In the table is from ICRP 62. And in our 100 applications, we saw that the researchers themselves rated their research very high in the category 2B and 3. This was used to set those constraints for the projects, and we applied age adjustment to those constraints also in 3 groups. And we thought that 100 millisievert above, it required specific consideration, detailed risk assessment. And we concluded that the suicidal benefit varied for similar projects when they were rated. ICRP 62 also includes some specific considerations. We have children, informed consent is a problem. We have 15% of the projects included children. We have risk and age that was taken into account. Risk and gender, we don't take that into account. And we have pregnancy, not explicitly taken into account, but that was often an exclusion criteria for the research. And we have this last point of lower life expectancy of the volunteers. And this we consider a great challenge to include. In publication 62 also have considerations of design of the research, advising that the total number of volunteers should be kept limited. Perhaps older volunteers should be included, but that is also very not so easy for researchers to address, because we have a statistical power of the research. They want to have more volunteers. And of course, this publication also addressed justification optimization. And I think that we have to highlight that the concept of justification differs from applications of indicated medical exposures. And it is also required adequate competencies is needed in this field. Publication 62 also addressed the evaluation of the project, for example, in the ethics committees. And I think that it's important to remember that countries have different types of procedures for this. For example, in Sweden, we have a national authority for ethical approval, taking into consideration risk assessment and the information to the volunteers, sets those constraints for projects, but lacks information to evaluate justification on optimization. And we think it's important to highlight that the medical facility actually exposing the volunteers have a great responsibility and also specific and important competence. So for some concluding remarks regarding risk assessment, the uncertainty, especially for novel medical technology and new radiopharmaceuticals, have to be handled, and that's a challenge. Reoccurring exposure of volunteers is also an important issue. And assessment of risk have to be handled, and I will stress this shorter life expectancy parameter that is hard to handle. We have those constraints. This concept is also always a little bit hard to handle, but we have to be very clear about this when we communicate with research societies, etc. And we have different types of volunteers: children, patients, cohort, and healthy volunteers. This raised specific consideration from different point of view. And we have this miscellaneous research that is performed outside the healthcare setting. And maybe we have sort of non-medical research and volunteers exposed to ionizing radiation. So this, I can conclude that we have been very much relying on publication 62 for our radiation protection. And perhaps some of these items I have bring up today will be used and useful in the revision of this publication. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to ask Bill Small to come up from our Committee 3 to represent the task group 116 that Colin Martin presented on, because he can't be here. And I want to open up to the panel, but before I do, I want to say something about Anja Alman, because she has joined a new task group to update our publication 62 on the use of radiation in human biomedical research. And we're having a task group meeting tomorrow morning about this topic. So we're looking forward to, thank you for your presentation. We're looking forward to starting that process, which is long overdue, I think. So with that, we can open the floor, I think. We have one person at the microphone.
Thanks, Jeff Doviak. And before I ask Ali my two picky pet MRI questions, I just want to point out to everyone here that there's actually 10 CRPA past presidents at the symposium. Anyway, here are my two
Jeff, can you move closer to the mic, please?
Yeah, sure, there are 10 CRPA past presidents here this week. Anyway, my questions for Ali, I'll just give you my questions. So the first one is, how do you deal with the clips on TLDs and OSLDs for your staff? And the second question is, what do you do to mitigate against the sagging lead-lined doors?
What do you do to mitigate against the sagging of the lead doors?
I'll answer the second question first, and I'll go first. The sagging, that's a very good question. The PET MRI that we have is fairly new. That's something that I put we have, I think, if I'm not mistaken, 3 in Canada that so far we had the PET MRI installed across Canada. And I don't have an answer for that. Simply term, but that's something that I put that I saw in other institutions that they're having issues with, and that's what I wanted to point out. Having an answer for it, I don't have it, unfortunately. The TLD, we switch the clip at the back to a plastic. And that's the Marion that we use, and we switched that, and that sort of solved the issue with bringing him in. So there was a simple change.
Thank you so much. Manon?
Hi, I'm Manon Rouleau from Radio Protection Inc. in Canada, province of Quebec. My question is addressed to Mika, and I have a few comments too. I'm really happy to see that ICRP is producing document on optimization in medical imaging. It was a need, and I'm glad to see that. I've been for a few years in charge of a provincial CT and PET-CT optimization program. And my experience is that I saw that you involve health physicists, radiologists, and radiography technologists. But in our case, we had biomedical engineers and health physicists to the process, to the practical process. And our learning point was that the more specialists you involve, they are all involved directly or indirectly in radiation safety. So the more you involve, the more you get buy-in. But we also involve administration of hospitals. Since we visit a lot of hospitals, and we had to make sure that we had the buy-in of the hospital to achieve results and durable results. My learning is that we forgot one stakeholder that is in the center of everything, the patient. And I haven't seen that in your presentation. I don't know if you have a thought on that and on the implication of the administration.
Thank you. An excellent question and comment. And I totally agree about the leadership commitment, how important it is to get sufficient resources for the optimization and also for the quality assurance process. Mm-hmm. And regarding the partners in multi-professional collaboration, actually it was maybe a bit simplified image. Sometimes, depending on the case, we have also application specialists, vendor specialists of different kind, also biomedical engineers. So it can be more multi-professional combination of person. The patient aspect is something that we take indirectly into account when designing the workflow of the imaging facilities. And because we are increasingly addressing our role, which is both quality and safety, if I may, as a medical physicist, we address the safety role. And for that, we have increasing tendency to include also patient feedback into our reporting system. So just an example of that, but surely that's a far-fetched and a bit indirect.
Let me just say that the part 2 of the TG 108 report has more about the patient role, and we have a table in roles and responsibilities for all stakeholders in part 1, including the patient. So thanks for asking. I think she was, yes.
Hi, good afternoon or good morning. My name is Ida Keisha Sebelejo and I'm from South Africa. And I'm a diagnostic radiographer as profession. So my question is for Mika. Is first a comment. I just want to say thank you for your presentation and also indicating that the multi-professional includes radiographers as well, because I'm actually currently busy with my PhD in diagnostic reference levels in CT. I just wanted to know, here in Finland or with the task group, how are radiographers involved in all of this process that your document is working on?
Yes, very good point. Also in the task group, we have a radiographer to provide feedback. And linked to the previous comment and question, I think it's important to have this aspect of patient workflow included in the optimization process, because, for example, patient positioning has effect to the radiation dose and image quality. So that alone is already a good example of why it's important to have these multi-professional aspects into the whole process of optimization. And also in the task group, it was from the beginning very clear that we need to have this multi-professional combination also to the task group.
I don't remember who was first. Okay, go ahead.
Mahesh, I'm part of the committee 3. The question is for Bill. He wanted me not to ask the question. I'm going to ask. The question is, when we talk to the radiation therapists in general, trying to talk about imaging dose, they're like, why do we care? Because the imaging radiation therapy patients are getting so large dose, imaging dose is so small. So how do you address that disparity?
No, I think if anything, this task group, that's one of the main objectives, is to have people think about it. I've seen some of my colleagues do 2 or 3 4D CTs on someone who's got an early stage breast cancer who's going to live for a very long time, and not think about the implications of the stochastic effects 10 or 15 years later. So the answer is, people a lot of times don't even think about it. We don't include the dose in our report, but if you're trying to push dose really high, even the small doses from daily imaging may have a really big implication. We haven't done a lot of research. This IDRT sub just started, and as soon as it got paid for, everyone did it. So the answer is, I think we need to focus a little bit on the stochastic effects. We're curing more patients, and the low dose we give with all these CTs are outside the target too. It really worries me. So I think a lot of this will have an educational aspect to it, if that makes sense, Mahesh.
I have another comment about this because it's been a long time in the radar screen for the Image Daily campaign. If we're doing 3 or 4 CT scans through the same body part in a child every day of their radiation therapy plan or radiation therapy course, and they have 35 treatments, that's a lot of CT scans, and 80% of children survive at least 5 years. Often they are cured. And we need to be responsible about that. And these CT scans are not optimized. nobody really pays attention to the optimization process. So the CT scans are often performed at the adult doses. And nobody has paid attention to this. And it's time that somebody pays attention to this. So it's kind of like being back in 1999 with where we were with children's CT scanning. Oh, yeah.
Yes, I'd like to add shortly that onboard imaging doses can be actually quite high, and they are targeted mainly outside the area of therapy, and so they have quite an extensive range of healthy tissues irradiated.
And there's one more piece to the puzzle, which Bill Small's group is way ahead of most groups around the world. There's no, in most cases, as was presented by Colin Martin, no standard for interpretation of these CT scans, at least in their initial scanning for the treatment planning setup. So the question is, what is the ethics behind the interpretation or no interpretation of the initial CT scanning for planning? I think most of us, if we were undergoing a cancer treatment, we'd want our CT scan interpreted for incidental findings. But in fact, in the therapy, why don't you comment?
Yeah, I could say, yeah, no, that's been a pet peeve of mine. So I was able to get our diagnostic radiologists to overread our CT simulations. Some of us do that, so then we send them to the PACS, they read it, they give a report, but they don't get paid. So they do it out of the goodness of their heart, and that's a mistake. I've seen some major problems happen, missed lung nodules that become a cancer because the radiation oncologist isn't really looking at it very well. So I think that's another aspect of this too, is that we need to make sure we use those images. We are giving dose. And I actually think in the future, I'd like to see us do the diagnostic scan at the time we're doing the plan so that we remove one of the images. That's really going down the line a little bit more, but that's something I like to see happen too.
All right. Thank you so much. We have one question to the side, and then after with Viviane. Go ahead, please.
Hi, good morning. My name's Jamie. I work in nuclear medicine department in the UK, and my question is for Anja on the exposure volunteers. And I was wondering your opinion on how it applies to clinical trials for radionuclide therapy. Something that came to mind was a paper I was reading a few months ago about an astatine-labeled antibody being used to assess toxicity in a clinical trial. And so it was treated to patients that were in complete remission of their ovarian cancer. So there was no actual benefit envisaged for them. It was purely to assess toxicity, which surprised me somewhat. So I wanted your opinion on how that fits into your work.
That was a question for Anja, right? Yes, go ahead, please.
You want to repeat it? I don't think I heard all of it.
Can you repeat for Anja a little maybe slower?
Yeah, sure.
And we have some multi-language translation.
Yeah, of course. So my question was your opinion on the use of radionuclide therapy in clinical trials. So an example was an astatine-labeled antibody that was used in a clinical trial purely for assessing toxicity. So it's an alpha and a gamma-emitting radionuclide. So the dose, while it wasn't assessed in the paper that I read, must have been reasonably high. So I wondered your thoughts on the suitability of that.
We didn't actually, in our investigation, we didn't encounter clinical trials or radiopharmaceuticals. But certainly this is a great issue when it comes to research. And we can, for example, see that this is a challenge when it comes to the dose estimations regarding new radiopharmaceuticals. And we see a need for, a special need for assessing radiation dose in this field. It kind of overlooked the therapy, for example, is administered by activity only and not absorbed dose to the patients. So this is certainly a challenge, but it seems that it's not so common. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question before we move over to Viviane for Anja. In one of your slides, you had expressed the risk at various levels. And we had this challenge in our center about what is the difference with, and it goes back to communication, trivial and minor, when you are trying to explain to a patient what the risk really mean.
Yes, actually, perhaps we do not include these terms when we assess these information sheets for the patients. I think that it's very common to try to compare with other, for example, natural background radiation, etc. So it's that is actually something we might discuss when we revise now, and to clarify a little bit about these issues. Thank you.
Just an example from Finland. We recently revised our guidelines, national guidelines for research-related exposures, and we basically used the same communication guideline for risk communication that we use for other exposures too. And that doesn't go usually very far into quantitative side. It mainly addresses in words describing the level of risk, like nearly negligible or something like that. So it's good to have guidelines.
Thank you very much. We look forward to the work of the update on this work for the committee task group. Yes, go ahead, Viviane.
Vivian Munoz from Australia. I have a question, two questions actually, one for Mika and one for Ali. In Australia, we have an accreditation system which requires the submission of dose reference levels for CT and angiography and also for nuclear medicine. However, the submission takes into account 30 exposures of each protocol only out of an entire 4-year program. Is there anything by the Commission that would advocate a certain minimum number of studies to be looked at for optimization, and also for continuous optimization by CT departments and imaging departments to better evaluate the doses being given?
I didn't understand it. Can you just repeat it right up against the microphone? We're just having trouble hearing you. It's
yes, sorry.
The feedback thing.
Okay, what I was saying, in Australia, we have a program, an accreditation program, which requires the submission to the government of our dose reference levels, okay, for patients. However, the selection of these dose reference levels, okay, is limited to 20 to 30 patients over a 4-year period.
Okay.
It just defies to me that this is not optimizing dose. And whether or not the Commission is looking at maybe assisting the regulatory bodies to better evaluate more data in this sector.
So, yes. So the question is whether the ICRP would work to review or make recommendations to the government when reviewing the optimization, that there's more patients included for the average.
For DRLs. Well, we have a publication. It's not nuclear medicine oriented. Well, it is actually. We have a publication 135. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's on DRLs, and it includes nuclear medicine. So you might want to have a look at that. But we can't impose we can make recommendations or provide advice. We cannot make, the government has to choose what they want to do. if that makes sense.
My second question was for Ali in relation to the PET MRI. When the shielding calculations are done, and particularly we're talking about corridor doors and we're looking at weight imposition, is it generally use the occupational dose constraint or the member of the public dose constraint? Because I've had several arguments, certainly in Australia, as to whether the nursing staff are considered a member of the public, or if they're trained in radiation safety, whether they're an occupational worker.
Do you understand the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Occupational.
Yeah.
I think they use the occupational dose strength to calculate that shielding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for one last question. Yeah.
It's George McGill, a physicist from Brisbane, Australia. I've had the pleasure of working in several jurisdictions, and I've got questions for everybody, but I'm happy to have them out of the meeting so people can get to their coffee. I want to commend the work of the committee. So if I was to keep it short, very short, it was an observation that when performing, it's a question for Anya, an observation, when dealing with dose constraints, we can use the DRLs as a dose constraint for a procedure. But one of the critical things that investigators struggle with is standard of care, because we don't take into consideration to the risk standard of care. So when I see reports from other centres, we have to compare it with what we do, and if our standard of care is different, we have to report on that dose difference, even though the total dose to the patient is identical. So is there a way of actually standardizing the standard of care?
I can't hear you. So I think the question is whether we are standardizing the standard of care, because there's difference among center. So when you calculate the extra dose for the study, then you have to go back to the standard of care is not the same. So I don't know, Anja, if you want to comment?
I don't think we're doing that. I'm not sure that anyone's doing that.
Well, what we find is that if a procedure is standard of care, then it's benefit to the patient, and you don't have to do a risk assessment as part of the research protocol.
Can I make a comment on that one?
Sure.
It's very difficult to standardize patient doses across different demographics, sizes, and population. We should not attempt. DRL is a very good quantity for quality control only, and yeah.
I was using the DRL just to say, look, if your facility complies with the national DRL, then you can use that for your dose calculations. But when it comes to an investigator deciding whether they need a ethical approval for the additional exposure, well, what's the additional exposure? The NCCN reported that there was an increase in referrals for PET-CT, even though they couldn't identify the reason for that increase in referrals for PET-CT. It was purely because the researchers were wanting additional information.
Put your mouth right up next to the
Sorry about that. The additional, there's an increase in the number of referrals which radiologists have to report, but the radiologists can't see the benefit of that additional imaging. So is standard of care set by the PI, or is it set by the radiologists?
I know that in our center, we evaluate the dose calculated correctly, and when we ask in our form to have the standard of care explicitly calculated or expressed so that it's not a decision to make if it's right or wrong, but then we look at what's the additional, and that's what our Radiation Safety Committee evaluates.
And we do the same thing with the...
And we do the same thing, but between different centres and different countries, the standard of care is different.
Yeah, I don't think we... yeah, that's a tough question.
Yeah, I think we should stop here and maybe have a conversation afterwards about this. But I want to thank everyone for attending, and this has been a very interesting session. Thank you very much.